Hello, this recording will be a continuation of Chapter 1, our Introduction to Intentional Interviewing. And so what we'll talk about through this recording is defining cultural intentionality, stereotypes and privilege. We'll define resilience and self-actualization, and then we'll link that all back to the microskills. I also like to put a reminder on the agenda slide that quiz number 1 on Chapter 1 will be available on DC Connect for a week. So please make sure you check to make sure that you know the available dates of the quiz. It will be available for 1 full week for you. But before we move on to the next unit, you should complete quiz 1 on Chapter 1. In the last recording, we talked a bit about intentionality and what that means. And so we're moving forward to defining more specific cultural intentionality. So it's important to recognize that we are all cultural beings. We are all cultural beings based on a variety of factors: race and ethnicity, our age, our gender and gender identity, our life experiences, traumas we've been through, and the list goes on. Every single one of us is a cultural being in our own way, and the clients that you work with are going to be cultural beings in their own way. And multicultural competence is essential to counseling our clients. So you might be wondering, well, how do I master that skill? Well, I'll always say practice, 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 of which you'll get lots of in this and the next course. But in addition to that, we need to have some self-awareness as well as knowledge, skills, and action. Self-awareness can be developed through a variety of ways, and some of you might be listening to this recording thinking, I'm a pretty self-aware person, and others of you might be thinking, geez, that's something that maybe I need to work on, is becoming more self-aware. So it's just recognizing your own biases, acknowledging when you yourself might be stereotyping a person, which we'll talk about shortly, or even when others around you use stereotypes or bias remarks, and being assertive enough to kind of correct them and let them know that what they're saying maybe is a stereotype and is not just and fair to be using. Okay, so having self-awareness, and then of course we'll help you build the knowledge as we go through this course. Culture plus intentionality is really being aware of diversity. It doesn't mean that you need to know and understand all the different cultural factors in each of your clients' lives, because sometimes we lean on them to teach us a bit about, their culture, their background, and ways that they've grown up in the world around them. But you definitely need to be able to flex your skills, which you'll learn through this program, in order to meet the needs of your various clients. I mean, it is one thing to allow your clients space to sort of educate you on some of their culture and upbringing, but you don't want to do that session after session after session, because then the client's not really getting the sort of support that they might be looking for in seeking you as their counselor. And there really is no correct response, which is why we use the microskills and we build many, many tools to put into our quote unquote tool belt in order to develop an approach that's going to work for the unique clients who come through our doors and through our office. So the keys to cultural intentionality, first and foremost, is not to stereotype. And you might think, oh no, I definitely don't stereotype. I'm not one to do that. But I think it comes more commonly than we might realize. And I know when I've taught this in person before, we'll come up with examples of, the stereotype that cops eat donuts, for example. And that happens more often than you think, that people will stereotype that, or that, males act a certain way versus females who act a certain way. I have a friend who works at with a construction company, and she still says every time she's carrying something heavy from one place to another, passers-by will comment and say, oh, they make you carry that by yourself? That's a stereotype and a gender bias, really, assuming that a woman is not capable in the way that a man is, or that she needs to rely on a male to help her carry something heavy, right? So we stereotype and we use biases more often than we think, and that's something we really need to be aware of so that we're not projecting it onto our clients and we're allowing them to feel safe in the office or the space in which we're meeting them. So if you can take a moment to think of some example stereotypes that you know of or have heard of and how they might be harmful. And here's one small image just to kind of highlight some that exist. I'm punk, so I must rebel. I'm Asian, so I must be good at math. I dye my hair crazy colors, so I must be looking for attention. Or if a female dresses in a certain way, that, you know, people might assume that they're looking for attention, right? Those are all examples of stereotypes that can ultimately be harmful to how we develop our own identity. The other piece about cultural intentionality is to really recognize privilege. White privilege, male privilege, class privilege, all of these things exist in our world, whether or not we want them to or whether or not we believe it, they do exist. And we operate based on these privileged biases on a daily basis. A great example would be the pandemic. If you were somebody who was able to go to the stores when everything went into initial chaos, and if you were able to purchase mass amounts of toilet paper, I don't know why people did that, but mass amounts of toilet paper and food, and you were able to purchase a lot and stock up, that is privilege. That is class privilege, because somebody who lives on like Ontario disability support and is paycheck to paycheck, or who just, you know, can't afford to stock up, would be of a lower income bracket, so lower class, lower socioeconomic status, and unable to go and stock up because they can only afford their groceries on like a weekly or bi-weekly basis, and they live from paycheck to paycheck. So that alone is privilege. The pandemic revealed lots of privilege that some of us have compared to others, even childcare and things like that. You see some parents who are bringing their young children out to the grocery store, and you might be judging them and wondering, oh, how can you do that? Why would you drag your kid out to a store during a pandemic? Maybe it's because they had no other option. And that alone tells us about privilege. So who creates privilege? Where does that come from? Us. Society, societal structures that we ourselves maintain, that we ourselves contribute to, and that we live in on a daily basis. So I'm not saying this to make you feel guilty or bad for your choices and behaviors, but rather just to create that self-awareness, just recognizing what your privileged pieces are, white privilege, male privilege, class privilege, or other privileges that you possess, and having awareness so that, again, you're being respectful and mindful when you're working with clients who themselves might not fit into that same privileged category. So helping to understand their worldview. And we'll talk a bit more about that in chapter 2, and you'll also read it in your textbook. Moving to resilience and self-actualization, and what a better time to talk about resilience than through a pandemic. So, I mean, many of us, and especially children, I find, have really shown us their ability to withstand hardship, which is part of resilience. And your textbook authors say it nicely, actually. They say we cannot expect to solve all of our clients' issues and challenges in a few sessions, but in a short time with them, we can help them to make a difference. And every person's journey is their own. So again, having that cultural awareness and that cultural intentionality allows us to assess and kind of understand our clients' level of resilience, so what their coping strategies are, and what they're sort of lacking or what they struggle with, and their level of moving towards self-actualization, which I will define shortly. So we want to look at, again, their ability to bounce back from adverse situations, which is resilience, and to move towards self-actualization, seeing themselves, recognizing themselves, and finding ways to love and be content with themselves. So resilience is defined as the ability to bounce back, nice and simple, easy to remember. And self-actualization is defined as someone's potential. So looking to one's own potential. And again, that's going to be different for each and every person. So it's not up to you to tell your client what their potential is and say, oh, but you're really good at. Rather, it's for you to help them explore what they see as their own potential and how far they can reach towards that potential. So resilience is about competence, self-respect, and learning for the future, adapting, learning, and being willing, being open-minded, and willing to learn for the future and move forward no matter the circumstances. That's resilience. You cope with adversity. Self-actualization is where the self-limitations stem from. So first, you have to help your clients recognize that. Where are their self-limitations stemming from? Were they taught that growing up? Is it their mother or father's voice in their head that constantly tells them that they're unable to, that they can't move forward and they're not capable? where do those self-limitations stem from, and how can we help to break down those self-limiting barriers? And then looking at the intrinsic, so from within instead of the extrinsic, from external. So looking at the strengths from within to break down the external barriers. And that helps us move our clients towards self-actualization. You can probably guess why those two terms are intertwined and together. They really go hand in hand. A person needs to develop strength in their resilience in order to move forward towards self-actualization. You'll learn more about self-actualization in your psychology course, so hopefully these two courses will kind of marry with one another and support your learning journey. I love this image, and perhaps you can have a little giggle at it too, because I really do remember, even though it seems like a lifetime ago, I do remember what it felt like to be a student. I was a student when I was doing my undergrad and my grad certificate. I was full-time student and working part-time, but more closer to full-time hours to, pay my bills and be able to afford my tuition. And it was really stressful. I truly do empathize. And then when I went to do my master's degree, I was working a full-time job and going to school part-time. And that was just as challenging. I was traveling to Toronto from Bowmanville area in order to complete that as well. And it just feels overwhelming. And you really feel like the guy in that image there, where you just want to rip your hair out because you don't really know how to cope. And your clients are going to have experiences like that too. When I got into the working world, part of my career was supporting students like yourselves and their mental health needs. So you'll encounter, fellow students when you're out there on placement. You'll encounter parents who have young children and are trying to cope through this pandemic and school and juggling all of that responsibility. You might encounter clients who have developmental disabilities and learning disabilities and are trying to cope in this chaotic world. You'll encounter such a variety of clients. And so at the base of that is really just recognizing, again, that piece about cultural intentionality, where their backgrounds stem from, what their challenges are, what their coping mechanisms are, and how you can support them moving forward. And there's some really fantastic, I find reassuring information out there about neuroscience and resilience, which is basically our brain's ability to adapt. So we are biologically wired to adapt. And we never, I shouldn't say we never, we didn't used to know our brains to function this way. It's actually newer learning within the last decade or so that we have learned about neurogenesis and neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to rewire itself. So if you encounter a client who's been through significant trauma, who feels hopeless and helpless, it is actually possible, obviously not in any rushed way, but it is actually possible for them to grow and strengthen their resilience and to move forward carrying that trauma and developing new relationships to their past experiences. We obviously can't change the past, but we can change our relationship to the past, which is through neuroscience. Really fantastic stuff. Appendix 4 of your textbook has a lot more information, and you'll learn more in your psychology class as well. So neuroscience and resilience is recognizing your potential is hardwired in our brains based on biology and heredity. So it's recognizing that, yes, we are like our mothers and we are like our fathers. Whether or not we want to admit it, there are pieces of us genetically wired from our parents and grandparents and intergenerational stuff. So there is going to be some potential that is hardwired to that, but that's not our ceiling. That's not our limit. That doesn't mean we can't do differently than those generations before us. Another fun fact is that 80% of medical issues involve the brain and stress. So research has actually demonstrated that 80% of medical issues, not mental health issues, medical issues involve the brain and stress. So that just goes to show that the mind and body is really reliant on each other. And plasticity. So again, I've already kind of defined that, but it's that your brain can actually rewire itself. And this is part of resilience and how we can build resilience in clients. In counseling our clients, we can actually help them to rewire the brain and generate new neural communication pathways. brain-based assessments. So some may say that that's the future of counseling. And in Appendix 4 of your textbook, there's a whole piece on that, and it's a bit up for debate because not everybody wants to look at brain-based assessments, and not everybody would have access to equipment to do brain-based assessments either. But it is sort of a future direction of counseling. And if you're interested in learning more about that, I do encourage that you check out Daniel G. Amen. My supervisor for when I do private practice actually brought that name up to me, and I've looked into a couple of his books, and he has some online work that is really fascinating. Ultimately, neuroscience enables us to be more skilled practitioners. So the more knowledge you develop about how the brain and the body are connected, the better able you'll support your clients. So if you know more about neuroscience, you're going to be more skilled in this field. Like I said, I would tie it back to the microskills. So each week you'll learn about that hierarchy of microskills. I know that diagram isn't the most legible, but it's in the textbook all throughout. So look back at those microskills and see where we are. You'll notice that we are now completing the base of the triangle. Actually, next week we'll move on to ethics a little bit and a little bit more about multicultural competence. And then following that, we're going to move to attending and empathy, then up to observation skills and so forth. And we will continue to integrate this knowledge while using the microskills in practice. You might also be wondering what the field of social service work will look like in these modern times. So one of the things your textbook highlights is that we don't always meet clients in a traditional office setting anymore. So when you get out onto placement, you most likely would be at like a stationary setting in your first placement, because most of our students go to places where clients come to. But as you move forward into the field, and if you're at places like Durham Mental Health Services, Canadian Mental Health Association, or if you are fortunate enough to get on with a hospital like an assertive community treatment team, then you will most likely be meeting your clients in the community. You'll be going to their homes, their apartments, or you might be taking them for outings like grocery shopping and other things. And so you'll recognize that we need to bring those ethics and multicultural competence while we're out in the community alongside our clients as well. So you'll see the microskills are universally applicable to the settings in which we meet our clients. Phone, Skype, oh, that's great to highlight through this time, right? I never in a lifetime imagined that I'd be teaching fully online. I've probably mentioned it's not entirely my preference. I love to be in front of the class and interacting with you guys and having discussions with you guys. But you know what? We're safe where we are, and we're using the tools that we have, and thank goodness we have the technology we do. And it also teaches you this very adaptable skill, because you'll be practicing online with your peers, practicing your counseling skills, which will help you to prepare yourselves for placement, because placement might be in part or fully online depending on what the future holds. I also wanted to highlight your natural helping style, because as you're learning about the microskills and all these terms and definitions, you might be wondering, okay, I need to go back to, what brought me into this program in the first place. And part of that is going to connect back to what your natural helping style is. So if you're the person that your friends or family come to when they're in need and in help, and that's what inspired you to go into social service work, then you already have an idea of what your helping style is. A few of these questions will help you to kind of decipher that maybe further. And once we get into the practice groups, you'll really start to learn what your helping style is. So you want to know how you view yourself in the role of a helper, what your strengths are, what you might struggle with. Are you a good observer, or do you struggle with observing? Are you a good listener, or do you struggle with listening and maybe you're not very patient with listening? Are you a good problem solver, or do you struggle with that, right? So just kind of use it as your little self-check-in checklist, and you'll start to adapt and learn what your helping style is and the components that you might want to work on. In the helping profession, you're going to learn that we're not in the business of giving advice. You'll hear me say that over and over again until we really understand we are not in the business of giving advice. We are not here to solve our clients' problems. And I know that sounds completely ridiculous, because they're coming to us and that's what they're seeking. And they might not realize that we're not there to solve their problems. But what we are there for is to guide them in exploring themselves, in growing themselves, in building on their strengths and making changes where they, not we, where they see fit. That is an integral part of all of our helping style that we all need to work on developing, is really helping our clients to see what changes they want to make and not telling them the changes they need to make. So we ultimately operate at a pace that is good for the client, and we want to meet them where they are at. We don't want to push them beyond where they are at, where they won't come back to see us. All right, so like I said, quiz number 1 is available on DC Connect on all of chapter 1 that we've covered. You can find it under activities and then quizzes. The format is that it'll be 10 questions pulled from a pool of questions. So in other words, you might have a different 10 questions than your peers, and they are also randomized. Just so that you're doing it on your own and not doing group quizzing. There's also a time limit, but it's really lengthy, much longer than you'll get for tests. Well, longer in terms of per question. So it's 45 minutes for just 10 questions. That's more than enough time, because the goal of the quizzes is really to support you in reviewing your textbook and learning the key concepts of this course. You also get 2 attempts at your quiz, and your highest grade from those 2 attempts will count. So no matter what, you complete 2 attempts and your highest of those 2 will count, and it goes directly to your grade book. So you should be able to check your grade outcome after you've completed the quiz. As always, we will be meeting online as a group, and we're going to get into practicing in the role of client, counselor, and the rest can be observers, so that you can practice the micro skills that we're learning each week. And this is part of your 10% in process mark, so please do make sure you're joining. It breaks down to approximately 1% per week of attending and joining online. If you're unable to attend, please send me an email letting me know, so that I'm not counting on you being there. All right, the next lecture we will move on to chapter 2, so you are encouraged to read ahead in your book, and I shall see you online. Thanks, take care.